Hi, and welcome to the ninth lecture on Shakespeare's Hamlet. Today, let's turn to Act 3, Scene 4, which is known as the closet scene by Hamlet fans. I'm on page 1454 in your anthologies. And this is the scene where Hamlet finally confronts Gertrude. He finally confronts his mother, and we see him unleash a torrent of accusations. He's been brooding about his mother's relationship with Claudius all this time. And here at last, he has the opportunity to let his mama know just how it is he feels. And so, here at line 9 at the top of the page, Hamlet enters the stage, and you can see he's in a combative mood. He's in an aggressive frame of mind. He's ready to attack. He's ready for a battle. He says, "Now, mother, what's the matter?" And the queen responds, "Hamlet, thou hast thy father much offended." You can tell also that Gertrude, she's ready to fight as well. She uh, feels offended and reminds Hamlet that he has upset the king, his father. Notice that Gertrude refers to Claudius as Hamlet's father. And that's certainly not going to go well with Hamlet, is it? He responds, "Mother, you have my father much offended." So here Hamlet's referring to King Hamlet. He's letting her know that King Hamlet is his father, not Claudius. And Gertrude answers, "Come, come, you answer with an idle tongue. Stop playing games. Be serious. This is important. You've upset the king. Everyone is distressed. Why are you behaving this way?" And Hamlet says, "Go, go, you question with a wicked tongue." So Hamlet again is not going to let up. He's not going to back down here. He's standing his ground, and he's accusing her of being wicked. The very mention, the very idea that she could refer to Claudius as Hamlet's father, she is speaking with a wicked tongue. And she's in shock that he can be so disrespectful towards her. She says, "Why, how now, Hamlet?" And he responds, "What's the matter now?" You can hear the sarcasm in his voice here. He certainly is in a bitter mood, isn't he? And she says, "Have you forgot me?" That word forgot. She's reminding him, "I'm your mother. Show me some respect. Remember, you're my son. You owe me. You owe me some respect." And he says, no, he hasn't forgotten who she is. "No, by the rood." Notice he refers here in the phrase "by the rood," by the cross of Christ is the marginal note here. "No, by the rood, not so. You are the queen, your husband's brother's wife. And would it were not so, you are my mother." You can see the anger. And what is he saying here? You are the queen, your husband's brother's wife. And once again, he's referring to the incestuous nature of the relationship between Gertrude and Claudius. Remember the idea that a man who married his dead brother's wife committed incest, that he dishonored his brother, dishonored the family name, dishonored, in this case, the name of Hamlet. And the idea behind this is that a man who slept with his brother's wife, his dead brother's wife, trespassed upon the physical intimacy, the physical nature of their relationship. And in doing so, dishonored his brother, uncovered, revealed the sexual intimacy of that relationship. You are the queen, your husband's brother's wife, and would it were not so, you are my mother. So he has absolutely no respect for his mother, and he's finally telling her to her face. He's letting her know just how disgusted he is with her behavior. And she retorts, she is not going to back down here, is she? She says, "Nay, then, I'll set those to you that can speak," meaning she's going to go and get the king and have the king himself speak to Hamlet. And it's at this point that Hamlet becomes threatening, doesn't he? He says, "Come, come, and sit you down. You shall not budge." And does he become physically aggressive here? Does he grab his mother? Does he become physically abusive here? There certainly is room for that particular interpretation. He may become physically violent here and physically grab her and restrain her. In several productions of the play, directors do have Hamlet physically hold his mother, prevent her from leaving, from exiting the stage, from leaving her closet. Um, it may be that Hamlet is simply getting in her personal space here, towering over her, and, you know, the look on his face suggests that he may become violent. Uh, I Either interpretation I think would be possible uh, because you see what will be Gertrude's reaction to what he says here. He says, "Come, come, and sit you down. You shall not budge. You go not till I set you up a glass where you may see the inmost part of you." So Hamlet here, he wants to hold the mirror up to Gertrude's nature and show her just how she has been misbehaving. Show her that she is a woman who has been unfaithful to Hamlet's father, to the elder King Hamlet, that she is a woman of inconstancy. She's a fickle woman. She's frail. Remember Hamlet's expression, "Frailty thy name is woman." And it's at this point that Gertrude cries out, "What wilt thou do? Thou wilt not murder me." And she calls out, "Help! Oh!" So, yes, this idea that "thou wilt not murder me," has Hamlet physically grabbed his mother? And is he shaking her? Is he becoming violent with her? Or does he simply look as if he has murder on his mind here? We can't really know here, but this idea of her questioning him, "You're not going to murder me, are you?" We remember Hamlet's fifth soliloquy, don't we? We recall his words, "Let not ever the soul of Nero enter this firm bosom." And at that moment, we wondered, didn't we, if Hamlet would be able to keep his murderous impulses in check. Uh, and here we see, once again, we're reminded of Nero. Remember, Nero uh, had his mother murdered. He was a matricide. And so Gertrude cries out for help. And Polonius, it's at this moment, Polonius from behind the curtain. Remember, Polonius has concealed himself behind the arras, behind the curtain. He's listening in. He wants to know. He's still trying to determine, still trying to discover why Hamlet is behaving so strangely, why he's acting so madly. And Polonius is once more spying on Hamlet. He's behind the curtain, listening in. He's concealed himself there. And he as well cries out when he hears Gertrude calling for help. She cries out, "Thou wilt not murder me! Help! Ho!" And Polonius cries out, "What? Ho! Help!" And it's at that point that Hamlet draws his sword and he cries out himself, "How now, a rat?" And he stabs through the arras. "Dead for a ducat, dead." And he's saying, "I'll bet a ducat that I've killed you, the rat behind the arras." And Polonius, you hear Polonius cry, "Oh, I am slain." Uh, Brings up an interesting question. Does Hamlet know that it is Polonius behind the arras, that Polonius is the one who is concealed behind the curtain and is spying on Hamlet? Uh, the queen says, "Oh me, what hast thou done?" And Hamlet says, "Nay, I know not. Is it the king?" And this is why I'm asked the question, does Hamlet know that it is Polonius? Because here Hamlet says he doesn't know, he tells Gertrude he doesn't know exactly what he's done. Has he murdered the king? But we recall that Hamlet has just left the king in the prayer scene, the scene just prior to this scene. And Hamlet left the king while Claudius was at prayer, on his knees in prayer. So it's hard to imagine that Hamlet could think that Claudius has somehow uh, uh, managed to place himself behind the arras at this time, at this point in this scene. You have to wonder, why does Hamlet ask, "Is it the king?" And uh, I would speculate that perhaps he is wanting to let his mother know that he would have acted in the same way, the same fashion. He would have stabbed through the arras had it been the king. It's an act of defiance on his part. He's informing his mother of his deep, deep hatred for Claudius, and that he would have had no hesitation whatsoever had it been the king. And he's suggesting here that if it is the king, that as I said, uh, he would have driven his sword through the curtain nevertheless. It's a very subtle way of his telling her, I think, that he would have killed Claudius had it been Claudius behind the curtain. But it does seem strange that Hamlet could believe. It just doesn't seem possible, does it? That Hamlet could believe that the king has somehow managed uh, to between the prayer scene and this scene, the closet scene. I mean, very little time has passed. How has the king managed to hide himself, secret himself behind the curtain here? At any rate, and two, he knows Polonius. And Polonius cries from behind the curtain. Surely Hamlet recognizes Polonius's voice. And in recognizing Polonius's voice, we have to recall that Hamlet detests Polonius. He really does loathe Polonius as well. Um, Hamlet imagines that Polonius is principally responsible for keeping Ophelia uh, um, from preventing Ophelia from communicating with Hamlet. Surely Polonius is responsible for that. He knows what a meddling man Polonius is. He sees Polonius as he sees Claudius. Polonius, Hamlet believes, is a political man and a personally ambitious man. Uh, Surely Hamlet believes that Polonius had a major hand in electing Claudius king during Hamlet's absence while Hamlet was away at the university. And we've seen Hamlet in conversation with Polonius throughout Act Two, for example. Polonius is the chief object of Hamlet's scorn, of his disgust. And behind that guise of madness, behind when Hamlet, if you recall, determines to put on this antic disposition to feign madness, he really does mock and ridicule Polonius throughout Act Two. So we know how much Hamlet despises Polonius. And Hamlet also believes that he's Polonius's superior. After all, Hamlet is the prince, and Polonius is just a courtier. sure, a gentleman and a man with power and influence in the court, a man who has many privileges and so forth. But nevertheless, Hamlet does see Polonius as an inferior. So I would imagine he knows that it's Polonius behind the heiress, and that here's the opportunity for Hamlet to do away with one of his chief enemies, to kill Polonius and be done with him. And his mother cries out, "Oh, what a rash and bloody deed is this!" And look at Hamlet's response again, suggesting that it wasn't a rash deed because Hamlet agrees that it was indeed a bloody deed, but he doesn't agree with this idea of it being a rash deed. Most critics, when they read this scene, they don't think that Hamlet knows it's Polonius behind the heiress. A few critics do. Um, and if Hamlet knows that it's Polonius, then it isn't a rash deed. He knows what he's doing. He's killing Polonius deliberately. As I said, he sees Polonius as a soldier, if you will, in the enemy camp, in Claudius's camp, and in the war for power and control. So yes, Hamlet doesn't agree with Gertrude that it is a rash deed. Uh, he says, "A bloody deed, almost as bad, good mother, as kill a king and marry with his brother." Now, here he accuses his mother of having conspired with Claudius, of having killed the elder King Hamlet. But look at Gertrude's response: "As kill a king?" She's in shock. She's in dismay. She's horrified at the thought of the idea. And there's no indication in the text to suggest that Gertrude knew of Claudius's plan to murder the elder King Hamlet. Um, I don't believe there's any evidence in the text to suggest that could support that particular interpretation. She does seem ignorant of the murder here as kill a king. She doesn't understand Hamlet's words here. And Hamlet responds, "Aye, lady, it was my word." That's what he said. He's not going to um, he's not going to take this his word back. He believes that his mother did conspire, that she did have a hand in having uh, her husband murdered. So he turns to he Hamlet at this point parts the heiress. He parts the curtain, and he discovers uh, Polonius's body. It's Polonius. Polonius is indeed the man he has killed. And he says to the dead body, he says, "Thou wretched, rash, intruding fool, farewell." And notice he's calling, notice the names that he the, calls Polonius here. He's a wretched, fool, an intruding fool, a meddlesome fool. And it's Polonius who has behaved rashly in spying on Hamlet, in having concealed himself, hidden himself behind the heiress. And then Hamlet again says, "I took thee for thy better." In other words, he imagined it was the king behind the heiress spying on him. But once again, I would say that it's difficult to see how that would be possible. And once again, I would imagine here that Hamlet is letting his mother know that had it been Claudius, he would have acted uh, just as he did. "I took thee for thy better." Or perhaps it's Hamlet's way of trying to rationalize his killing of Polonius. That might be a possibility as well. But what I would argue is it does. I'm highly skeptical of this idea that Hamlet uh, believed indeed that it was Claudius behind the errors. And look what else he tells Polonius. Look what else he says to the dead Polonius. Take thy fortune, thou find'st to be too busy, is some danger. Thou find'st to be too busy. Thou find'st to be too busy is some danger. It's almost as if Claudius is telling the dead Polonius that the responsibility for your death, for this murder, is your own because of being too busy, being too meddlesome, uh, being a spy, spying on Hamlet. That it's Polonius's responsibility, and Hamlet dismisses in burdening Polonius with the dead body with the responsibility here, burdening Polonius with the responsibility for his own death. Hamlet is dismissing his own responsibility, isn't he? And he doesn't seem to show any remorse at this point. I think it's unfortunate that in some productions of the play, when Hamlet speaks these lines, the director has the actors speak them as if Hamlet is remorseful, as if he's sorry that he has killed the intruding fool. But the words wretched and rash and intruding and fool, I mean, all seem to suggest that Hamlet does hold a deep contempt. He holds a deep contempt for Polonius here. And he dismisses what has occurred after only 3 lines, and he turns to his mother. This is what Hamlet uh, this is what Hamlet's mind is on, right? His mother, the business he has with his mother, and he turns to her and says, "Leave wringing of your hands," because she's in a state of panic here. Obviously, she's wondering what will her son do next, the way he's behaving, and he says, "Peace, sit you down, and let me wring your heart, for so I shall if it be made of penetrable stuff." Again, Hamlet wants to hold that mirror up to Gertrude's nature, and he's wondering if he will be able to have some effect on her here. Is her heart made of penetrable stuff? Or is she too callous? Is she too hardened? Is she too indifferent to how she has behaved? And what Hamlet does in this scene, yeah, on page 1455, is he does rebuke her. He if you look at line 56, he holds up 2 pictures, one of his father, King Hamlet, and one of Claudius, Hamlet's uncle. And he says at line 56, "Look here upon this picture and on this." So he's going to contrast the 2 brothers, and look how he contrasts them here. It's fascinating. Again, we get this idealized portrait of his father. He calls his father once again. He refers to his father as Hyperion, the Titan god of light, of wisdom, and he Hamlet also calls his father Jove himself, the king of the gods, the all-powerful king of the Roman gods. And next, he refers to his father as Mars, again, a Roman god, the god of war. So his father, he's reminding his mother that his father was also this famous military hero. And then he points to the other picture and he describes his uncle And here, in contrast to the idealized portrait of his father, we have a debased portrait, if you will, of his uncle. He says at line 67, "Here is your husband." And again, you can hear the irony, the scorn, the, the ridicule in his voice, like a mildewed ear. So, yeah, I mean, Claudius is presented here in this passage as depraved, so a man who is ignoble as opposed to being noble like his father had been. And Claudius is depraved. He's a degenerate. He's a lech and a deviant, if you will. And Hamlet asked his mother, "How could you possibly stoop from having loved this man? How could you have stooped to now loving this beast, this animal? How is that even possible?" And Hamlet, he begins to answer his own question here. He says it could not possibly have been love, because he insults his mother. He says, you're past your prime. You're not, you're not in that the heyday of youth when you tend to romanticize love and believe that there's such a thing as true love. And it certainly can't be, mother, that you are what you've done isn't rational uh, in having married Uncle Claudius. You certainly aren't behaving rationally, and it isn't. It can't even be madness that has caused you to turn to Claudius, because even someone who had lost their ability to reason would not have committed such an offense. It must be, Hamlet says, it must be some devil that has, what does he say? What's the expression he uses? Has blinded you. Line 80. "What devil was it that thus hath cozened you at Hoodman blind?" Some devil has blinded you to the truth. Some hellish perversion, perhaps, some bestial lust, if you will. And for Hamlet, uh, Gertrude has become a symbol of depravity, and a symbol perhaps not just of her, of a symbol perhaps of all women's depravity. Remember, Hamlet in his very first soliloquy used the expression, "Frailty, thy name is woman." And there I explained that Hamlet thinks that if his mother could behave in such a way, if she could be unfaithful and inconstant, if she could have fooled his father, been so fickle, then all women have that potential. All women, if his own mother could commit such an offense, that all women were capable of committing such an offense. So Gertrude, as I said, is a symbol of depravity, and she's symbolizing as well all women's depravity here. They're all women's lustful nature. Um, and yeah, I think you could certainly interpret it that way. And then he continues to heap insults upon her and upon Claudius, and he refers to Claudius as a sleazy seducer. And at the top of page 1456, uh, he simply is relentless, isn't he? He continues to rebuke his mother, to berate her, to attack her character. He just won't cease to verbally abuse her here. And she cries out at last. I mean, she's simply horrified, and she cries out at line 91, "Oh, Hamlet, speak no more. Thou turn'st my eyes into my very soul, and there I see such black and grained spots as will not leave their tint." So, isn't that interesting that her conscience is bothering her here, isn't it? She's feeling the pricks and the stings of her conscience here, and it sounds as if she's agreeing with Hannah that she's feeling guilty at what she's done in having married Claudius. But why is Gertrude feeling guilty? That's the question I would ask. Um, because remember, the ghost accused Gertrude of having been an adulterer. She was his most seeming all virtuous queen. She only appeared to be virtuous, but that in fact she was an adulterer. But is that true? Do we have any evidence in the text? Is there any proof that she indeed committed adultery? In fact, perhaps what it why Gertrude, this is Gertrude's response here, but perhaps why she's feeling so guilty, why she says that Hamlet has turned her eyes into her very soul, and she sees the the horror of this crime she's committed. Maybe she was an adulterer in thought. Maybe she had longings for Claudius while her husband was still living. And we know Gertrude, being a Christian, would believe that that the what is the expression that when one sins and the one is commanded not to sin in the heart. I don't know if that's the exact phrase, but the idea one is not to even have such thoughts. One is not even to think to have such adulterous thoughts. And perhaps this is what she's feeling guilty about here, is that she had such thoughts, that she sexually desired Claudius while her husband was still living. After all, I pointed out that Claudius, if is a man of he appears to be a man of sophistication, of great charm, uh, very attractive, charismatic man, and she may have been attracted to him physically. She may have had thoughts of being with him sexually, and perhaps this is why she feels guilty. Because again, I, I, perhaps I've overlooked something in the text, but I've never found specific evidence that suggests that she was an adulterer. But Hamlet seems to think that she was, doesn't he? At any rate, Hamlet will not relent here, and he continues, and you can see him becoming more and more uh, 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 uncontrolled here. He's unable to keep his temper in check, and his emotions again carry him away. Even after she cries out, "Speak no more," he says, "Nay," I'm at line 95, "nay, but to live in the rank sweat of an enseamed bed, stewed in corruption, honeying and making love over the nasty sty." And notice here the imagery here, the rank sweat of an enseamed bed, of a greasy bed. And he, look at the metaphor, the bed becomes a nasty sty. Again, the image Hamlet has in his head of Claudius and Gertrude beneath the sheets. It's two animals engaging in a lustful act here. It's a bestial act, if you will. And Gertrude cries out again, "Oh, speak no more! Speak to me no more! These words like daggers enter in my ears." She uses, isn't that fascinating what Shakespeare does here? She uses the exact same metaphor that Hamlet used in his fifth soliloquy. If you recall, he says he's on his way to see his mother. And in that soliloquy, he says, "Let me speak daggers to her." He will verbally abuse her. He will rebuke her. He will let her have it, tell her exactly what he thinks of her behavior, but he will only speak daggers. He wants to harm her. He wants to harm her seriously, verbally. And here he has done the job, right? He's pulled it off because she says, these words like daggers enter in my ears. It's a brutal image there, isn't it? She's obviously suffering horrifically here. These words like daggers enter in my ears. So she's crying out, please stop, no more. So you can see what pain she's in, how great her suffering is here. And I think Shakespeare uses the same metaphor to make a point here, and that is that Hamlet's need for revenge, to revenge himself and to, uh, particularly on his mother, that it has succeeded, and yet he will not stop. And we recall that at the end of that soliloquy, that fifth soliloquy again, that Hamlet had to keep reminding himself, don't go any further than verbally abusing her, than holding that mirror up to her nature. Don't go any further than that. And he had to keep reminding himself. He had to tell himself to remain resolute. All right, let not ever the soul of Nero enter this firm bosom. He had to stay determined so that he didn't become he didn't lose, he would not lose control. And here it's suggesting that Hamlet may indeed lose control and may indeed murder his own mother, because look, he will not stop, will he? I mean, the intensity of his disgust, it keeps rising, and he cries out again. Look at, he just heaps scorn upon Claudius, a murderer and a villain. And then he calls Claudius a slave. And in the next line, a vice of kings and a cutpurse of the empire. And then finally, a king of shreds and patches. And the queen keeps calling out, no more, no more. And we wonder at this moment, I mean, Hamlet reaches, this is at this moment, the culmination of his tirade at this moment of apparent disintegration. I mean, Hamlet seems to be losing his mind here. Perhaps he has temporarily lost control, and perhaps he will actually murder his mother here. And what happens at this moment? Well, cue the ghost. The ghost returns. The ghost appears before Hamlet here at this exact moment when Hamlet seems to be on the verge of actually committing matricide. So, again, why this fixation on Gertrude? Why does Hamlet have this obsession with Gertrude's behavior? This would make here again, I would argue, is another deterministic feature, another cause behind Hamlet's procrastination in killing Claudius, in carrying out the ghost's commandment. And that is that Hamlet, and many critics have noted that Hamlet's fixation on Gertrude and her sexual behavior, that it ultimately reveals that Hamlet himself is sexually repressed. That on the conscious level, Hamlet, Claudius discussed Hamlet. Uh, and Hamlet loathes his uncle and sees his uncle, as I said, as a lech, as this sleazy seducer. And Hamlet's also disgusted with his mother for her frailty, her weakness, her inability to remain faithful, to remain constant to her husband. And this is occurring at the conscious level because at the subconscious level, critics argue that Hamlet fears his own sexual desires. Generally speaking, Hamlet is fearful of his own sexual nature, his own lustful feelings, and that he is again at the subconscious level, the level at which he's unaware that he is actually jealous of Claudius, and actually Hamlet himself actually wishes to act on his sexual desires, but that he is unable to. He has repressed his sexuality here. And it makes perfectly good sense, doesn't it, when you think first that Hamlet is a romantic, and that as a romantic, he believes in the idea of true love. He believes in the notion that two people are destined to find each other, they're destined for one another, that when two people come together, that it's a union of souls. Hamlet subscribes to this idea of a soul mate, and that the joining of these two people is first and foremost a spiritual union, a spiritual connection. And he imagines that that union is a union that will last, that it won't change, that the two people will remain constant and faithful to one another. And he has been disappointed in this, hasn't he? Um, so, first, yes, Hamlet has to repress his sexual desires because of his romantic nature. And in addition, we recall that Hamlet is a Christian. And Orthodox Christianity, again, supports this idea of virtue in marriage, that a marriage is a sanctified union, a holy matrimony, and that is a sacred uh, connection. And that when two people come together in marriage, they are blessed by the Christian God, and that it is a union that lasts till death parts the couple. And the idea of adultery is considered to be a mortal sin. It's one of the Ten Commandments, thou shalt not commit adultery. And in addition, traditional Christianity praises virginity and celibacy as well. Celibacy is revered as well. And a sexual union between uh, two people are come together, but primarily for procreational purposes, not for pleasure. And that is again the preachings of Orthodox Christianity. And I would think that Hamlet, he is a young man, let's recall, and I would conjecture that he's probably still a virgin. Remember, premarital sex for the Christian is forbidden. And so Hamlet probably is a virgin. And he does, nevertheless, he's human, and he does, nevertheless, have these sexual feelings, these uh, sexual desires. But he's had to repress that. And then this could explain, I would argue, why he is so obsessed, so distraught, and so obsessed with Gertrude and Claudius and their incestuous relationship. and he's this image and several. I mean, you can find, as I said, you can find quite a bit of evidence to support this in the play. He's constantly referring to Claudius as a lech. Remember, Claudius is a lecherous villain, and his mother is a wicked woman, a pernicious, oh, most pernicious woman. So you can see the anger and the hostility and the resentment that Hamlet holds um, concerning the relationship between Claudius and Gertrude. So that would be an interesting cause to explore here, I think, for your essay. And there's certainly enough information in this one scene alone, I think, that the evidence here that you could use to support your reasoning. It may indeed. I was thinking topic B, it might actually make a interesting uh, idea for topic B. Uh, for option B, you could choose Hamlet. You could discuss Hamlet's sexuality in the play. Focus on that alone and look at the relationships he has with the women in the play, particularly with Ophelia and with Gertrude. And you could zero in, you could focus on the nunnery scene between Hamlet and Ophelia, and the closet scene here between Hamlet and his mother. So that might, for those of you who'd be interested in exploring that topic for option B, uh, just send me a working thesis and a working essay map, and get my approval. And yes, that would make an interesting topic. So let's return here to the text. I'm at page 1456 at the moment. I've left everyone in suspense, haven't I? This is the moment where the ghost enters. This moment again, at which Hamlet appears to have lost all control, where he appears in this moment to be capable of matricide, and the ghost enters. And what's interesting about this, the ghost's reappearance, is that Hamlet alone sees the ghost. Gertrude doesn't see the ghost. We in the audience, of course, see the ghost, the actor on the stage portraying the ghost. Perhaps Shakespeare, remember? Perhaps Shakespeare is portraying the ghost himself. Um, we see the ghost and Hamlet sees the ghost, but Gertrude does not. And it's interesting how few critics even comment on this, that Gertrude doesn't see the ghost. And I always think, when I read this thing, I always think of a parallel scene in Shakespeare's tragedy Macbeth. Maybe some of you are familiar with that play, but Macbeth sees the ghost of Banquo shortly after he's had Banquo murdered. He sees Banquo. Uh, uh, And Macbeth is the only one on stage who sees the ghost of Banquo. No other character on the stage. Lady Macbeth doesn't see the ghost, and none of the other thanes on the stage see the ghost of Banquo. Only Macbeth sees the ghost. And of course, critics discussed how seeing the ghost and the reason why the other characters on the stage uh, don't see the ghost. The other characters don't see the ghost because the ghost is merely a manifestation of Macbeth's guilt. And that's why he alone sees the ghost, because Macbeth has had Banquo murdered, and Banquo was a close ally and friend of Macbeth's. Um, so why not here? Why why is there why isn't there more discussion on why Hamlet alone sees the ghost here? Because I would argue that it's very possible to interpret that Hamlet sees the ghost, only Hamlet sees the ghost again because this is a manifestation of Hamlet's guilt. When the ghost appears before Hamlet here, notice what the ghost says. First, the first line of the Ghost. Now, again, I'm on page 1456 at line 114. The Ghost says, "Do not forget. Do not forget." We remember the Ghost's exiting lines uh, just at the end of his meeting with Hamlet. Back in Act 1, Scene 5, the Ghost says, "Adieu, adieu, adieu. Remember me." And it's that word, remember, that sticks in Hamlet's brain. And here the Ghost is reminding him, do not forget. And then look what the Ghost says next. "This visitation is but to whet thy almost blunted purpose. I've come before you to remind you, do not forget. Do not forget what specifically? Remember the commandment that I gave you, to revenge my foul and most unnatural murder." Hamlet Hamlet's purpose has been blunted, and the Ghost has returned to whet that almost blunted purpose. This is what the Ghost reminds Hamlet of. And Hamlet would, of course, uh, at the subconscious level, be experiencing guilt for not having followed through on, not having carried out the commandment, not having carried out his duty as the son. And look at the second point the Ghost makes in the speech here. He turns Hamlet's attention toward Gertrude, and the Ghost says, "But look, amazement on thy mother sits. Oh, step between her and her fighting soul. Conceit in weakest bodies, strongest works. Speak to her, Hamlet." And here we're reminded of the Ghost's second uh, directive, and that was to leave Gertrude to heaven, to not in any way abuse her, either verbally or physically, but to leave her to heaven, allow her conscience to prick and sting her, leave her to her own guilty conscience. Let that become bothersome for her, let that trouble her. But whatever you do, Hamlet, the Ghost says, don't harm your mother. Respect her. Leave her to heaven. So here, Hamlet, in the process of, he's in the middle of, perhaps, he certainly is viciously attacking his mother here, verbally, and perhaps even on the verge of physically harming her, or even perhaps murdering her. And in the process, he's become so distracted, so obsessed, so obsessed with her, with his mother, and so fixated on her behavior that he's lost uh, all aim. All He's forgotten what his mission is, what his duty is as the son of a murdered king is. And so that's why I would argue that Hamlet sees the ghost. Hamlet alone sees the ghost. Gertrude doesn't, because the ghost really is a figment of Hamlet's imagination here in this scene. Just as many critics argue in Macbeth, the Ghost of Banquo is a figment of Macbeth's imagination, because Macbeth is overwhelmed by guilt and remorse for having his ally and friend murdered. And here, Hamlet, of course, would be feeling overwhelmed by guilt for not having followed through on the ghost's injunction. Both these points here are mentioned by the ghost. But again, this is the ghost, a supernatural entity, so none of us have access into the ghost's head. So we could begin once more to hypothesize on what the ghost's purpose, his true intentions here are. Is he once more the goblin damned who is reminding Hamlet to kill? And is he playing on trying to gain Hamlet's trust by pretending, feigning sympathy for Gertrude in this moment? That's a possibility. How can we know? But at any rate, uh, Hamlet does collect himself here. He does calm down, and he he really begins in a cool and calm fashion. Uh, one critic mentions here that Hamlet actually uh, assumes the role of a priest here in this scene, exhorting a sinner and uh, explaining to the sinner uh, uh, why the sin, explaining the sin that the sinner has committed and why the sinner should refrain from uh, continuing to sin. So Hamlet does assume the role of a priest, and that's the tone throughout the next two pages here on page 1457 and 1458. Hamlet, he's sort of a, he's sort of a, he's in the role of the authority figure here, as speaking to Gertrude, his mother, and he asserts his moral superiority, if you will, in chastising her and exhorting her to repent and to atone for her behavior and to refrain in the future from, as I said, recommitting the sin uh, of sleeping with Claudius, having sex with Claudius here. And his mother accepts the rebuke, doesn't she? She even asked at line, page 1458, at line 186, she even asks him, "What shall I do?" So she accepts Hamlet in this position of moral authority. She accepts him in this role as a kind of priest here. And he wins her over, doesn't he? He wins her loyalty here. He convinces her that he is not mad, that he has not lost his sanity, that he has his faculties, and that he convinces her that what she has done is wrong. And she's certainly ready to believe him, isn't she, after seeing how he's behaved and his aggression and hostility towards her. So he does win her over to, she agrees to abstain, right? He wins her to sexual abstinence. Uh, and it's from this point on, we've seen Hamlet really, as I said earlier, he's been brooding on Gertrude and her relationship with Claudius, but we don't see him any longer from this point on fixated on his mother. He does mention a few times in the remaining two acts, he does mention his mother and the incestuous relationship, but he doesn't, as I said, obsess over it. And he seems to. I suppose you could see this as this scene, the closet scene, this confrontation with his mother, as a kind of cathartic experience for Hamlet, perhaps. And he he's no longer going to. He never again will uh, confront her in this manner or chastise her or rebuke her in any way here. He does, as I say, win her over. She's now in Hamlet's camp, if you will, in this confrontation between the two enemies, Claudius and Prince Hamlet. Um, you could even argue that in doing so, he reestablishes his own beliefs, his own romantic beliefs, his own Christian values in when it comes to marriage. Um, You could possibly see him of having more confidence in the virtue in marriage here. But at the very end of the scene, the last words in the scene at page 1459, on page 1459, just before Act 4 opens, Hamlet turns once more to Polonius's body. And once again, we see no regret on Hamlet's part here, do we? No sorrow. He doesn't seem to feel guilty at this moment here. No remorse. Look what he says. It's rather callous, rather glib attitude toward the dead body, toward the man he's just murdered. This man shall set me packing. I'll lug the guts into the neighbor room. Mother, good night. And then he turns back to the body. Indeed, this counselor is now most still, most secret, and most grave. Here again, Hamlet is punning on the word grave. Grave in the sense of most serious, and also the fact that Polonius is destined for the grave here. Indeed, this counselor is now most still, most secret, and most grave. The idea that he's most secret, again, the suggestion here that Claudius was a meddler, was a spy, deserved the punishment he received. Could, even in Hamlet's mind, Hamlet could see it as a treasonous action to spy on the prince, the rightful heir to the throne here, the son of the elder King Hamlet. And now Polonius will take his secrets to the grave with him, all that he's ferreted out, all his treachery, all that he's discovered. He's now most still, most secret, and most grave. Who was in life a foolish, prating knave. Again, obviously Hamlet isn't feeling any guilt, at least at this moment, whatsoever. He's not feeling any guilt over having killed Polonius. Come, sir, to draw toward an end with you. Good night, mother. That Hamlet lugs the body from Gertrude's closet, lugs the body out of the chamber. And we're reminded all this time, again, it's interesting, isn't it, that Hamlet rebuking his mother for her sinful behavior, wanting to hold that mirror up to her nature and accuse her of her sinful act, her crimes, and even taking on the role, as one critic said. One critic says, as I mentioned, even taking on the role, a sort of priest here, exhorting a sinner, and all the while, the irony here, all the while he's doing this, there on the stage is Polonius's dead body, the man Hamlet has just murdered. There's Polonius's dead body, and it's bleeding out on the stage. And by the end of the scene, one can imagine that the floor of the stage is just seeped in red, seeped in blood. Once again, we have this idea, the idea of the man of desire, of need, and of want. It's what Hamlet wants, what Hamlet needs. That's what matters to him most. And that ultimately prevents the prince from being rational. And we're going to see, as I said in the last lecture, we're going to see in the last two acts, going to see this man continue along this path. this path of irrationality, and we're going to see all the damage, all the horror that results from his behavior. Be gone.